Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with law professor Nadine Strossen at the New York Law School. Nadine, again, great having you on the show.
I'm so delighted to be here, Aaron. Thank you.
So we've been talking about hate speech. And what is constitutionally protected free speech today?
So the Supreme Court has basically endorsed 2 fundamental principles about free speech. One is when speech is protected, and one is when speech may be punished. So the protected principle is usually called by lawyers viewpoint neutrality. The government must remain neutral toward speech of any viewpoint, and that means that government may never censor speech merely because a viewpoint is unpopular, even hated, even by the vast majority of the public. However, if speech with any viewpoint in a particular context directly causes certain specific, imminent, serious harm, and the harm can't be prevented any way short of silencing the speech, then censorship is permitted. So an example of speech that would satisfy what's sometimes called the emergency principle is a true threat, where the speaker means to instill a reasonable fear of physical attack or other kinds of harm on a specific person or small group of persons toward whom the speech is directed.
Such as, give me an example.
An example of that would be, and this is an actual case from the Supreme Court, burning a cross in near the home of an African American family with the intent to intimidate them. And clearly it's going to have that impact on a reasonable person given the historical baggage of the burning cross.
So one of the things we talked briefly about, we alluded to, and we were going to talk more about, was the concept of harm, speech that does harm. These days, people seem to be, some people, many people, looking at harm in a different light, that, oh, speech can cause me not physical harm, or the kind of, obviously, deep-rooted psychological harm that a specific threat, but that can cause me psychological harm, and I want to bring in the word snowflake maybe or something to that extent. What about that interpretation and that concern that your speech that I consider hate speech is damaging me psychologically and maybe even permanently causing me trauma?
And I think that those of us who defend free speech really understand the power of speech, or at least the potential power of speech, to cause great impact either for good or for ill. And certainly I have read a lot of studies, and I've personally been subject to hate speech, which makes me personally empathize with the fact that it can cause not only psychological damage, but also with physiological manifestations, and even have an adverse impact on free speech itself, Aaron, because if you're subject to a hateful ethnic slur, you might well, as I myself have experienced, be at least momentarily stunned into silence. Now, the fact that it can potentially cause harm does not mean that censorship is the answer, because that may well actually do more harm than good for a number of reasons. Many mental health and psychological experts have said that the most effective way to reduce the potential adverse psychic impact of hate speech is not to shield yourself from it, but rather to expose yourself to it in a concerted way using certain psychological techniques, including cognitive behavioral skills, to develop your resiliency in order to rise above it. And there are many moving examples of people who have trained themselves to do it, sometimes with the help of experts. Cory Booker quoted the radical Martin Luther King's writings. This is something that King and the other 1960s civil rights demonstrators did. They trained themselves to literally go face to face with people who were spewing the most outrageous hateful terms, and stood their ground and had the dignity and courage and grace to rise above it.
So why does limiting hate speech do more harm than good?
Oh, for so many reasons, and one of which is a reason why so many hate mongers actually seek to provoke their ideological opponents into censoring them or trying to censor them or disrupting them, because that gets them attention and sympathy that they otherwise would never have had. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has monitored hate groups for decades, in the summer of 2017 put out a guidance to college students because they anticipated there would be a lot of alt-right white nationalist recruiting on college campuses. And the SPLC said it may be very morally satisfying for you to try to censor hate groups, but you are just playing into their strategy. Please resist that temptation and ignore them. If you want to have your own affirmative celebration somewhere else where you're affirmatively celebrating equality and dignity, do that, but don't give them the oxygen that they are seeking to disperse their message. Another really adverse impact of hate speech laws in practice, Aaron, goes back to something we discussed earlier. Given how inherently subjective these laws are, they empower whoever is enforcing them to use completely subjective values, and not surprisingly, the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, which we know have certain biases built in, not surprisingly, the pattern is that these laws are disproportionately enforced against not only any critics of government, any advocates of law reform, any dissidents, but most tragically and ironically, against the very minority groups who were supposed to be protected by these laws. So in European countries that have these laws, we now see human rights activists complaining that that's the enforcement pattern and saying they ought to move more in the direction of the United States approach. No censorship, but more counter speech.
Well, speaking of censorship, and we touched on this briefly, but speaking of censorship, if you look what's happened on our college campuses in the last couple of decades, there's definitely been a move to control speech, to essentially punish people who express and utilize their First Amendment rights, to create specific places where you're allowed to have free speech.
So-called free speech zones.
Right. It seems like universities and colleges have, some of them have just kind of gone off the deep end. Talk about this trend and why you think it's good or bad.
First of all, there's a lot of debate as to how representative the examples are that we know that get all the publicity. And I do have to say, being on the campus lecture circuit, I think there's a fairly silent majority, at least it's not getting the media amplification that we've talked about earlier, of students and faculty members and administrators who are deeply committed to freedom of speech, academic freedom, open inquiry. And I'm very happy to say that there's been a lot of pushback thanks to the publicity, because even if it were just a minority of incidents where there has been suppression of speech, that, even one incident would be too many, especially when it happens at very elite universities that should be the leaders in academic freedom. So I want to talk about a fairly new organization called Heterodox Academy, which had its first national conference in New York in the summer of 2018, and brought together ideologically diverse, all across the partisan spectrum, faculty members and students who are committed to fighting against intellectual orthodoxy and fighting for open inquiry and open debate on campus. Even more inspiring to me as a professor are the number of student-originated organizations that are cropping up on campuses all over the country, one of which is called Bridge USA, which consists of efforts to bring together students and faculty members who deeply disagree on very contentious, divisive, sensitive issues, including race and gender, to have very robust, but mutually respectful civil discourse. So, I happen to be an optimist who always sees the glass half full. I think you can't be an activist without it. So the silver lining, to mix my metaphors, the silver lining to the cloud of these suppressive incidents you've talked about is it's really galvanized support for freedom of speech, a renewed support, and I have optimism that that's the momentum now.
I like your optimism. I think to me the momentum may be in the other direction for a couple reasons. One is when you look at kind of the political affiliations in most colleges and universities, it's almost monolithic. On the left, Democratic. You don't see a lot of conservative scholars and conservative faculty members. So I think you have, as a result, a lot of groupthink, and that obviously is not going to move things in the direction that you're talking about. I also think, just based on my experience and knowledge of colleges and universities, over time, colleges and universities, like any bureaucracy, they grow, they tend to do more, and they tend to create more rules, not fewer rules. So I think the trend has been very much towards suppression of speech.
I completely agree with you on what the trend has been, and as the name suggests, the initial impetus for what became Heterodox Academy were precisely studies that were done showing that, especially in particular disciplines and specific parts of the country, there is an increasing monolith on the part of faculty members. So, and interestingly enough, the social scientists, social psychologists who initially started this examination documented that research was less excellent, not surprisingly, when it was not subjected to criticism from people who have very different perspectives because of a phenomenon called confirmation bias. So the idea of diversifying perspectives on campus and opening up debate is not only good for individual liberty and democracy, but it's actually essential for universities to live up to their special role as pursuers of truth and knowledge.
Well, I couldn't agree more. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Nadine in just a moment.
There's more of the Aaron Harber Show after this.
When the president is constantly denouncing and scapegoating the media, that can become very dangerous because we don't want people to lose confidence and hope in the media as what has often been called the fourth branch of government.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Nadine Strossen. So Nadine, tell me about your reaction to fake news. And certainly President Trump has made this a major phenomenon across the country. What should the response be?
The response should not be censorship. I think you won't be surprised that I say that, Aaron. But in fact, that is the preferred or go-to solution for many people who understandably are upset about the potential and in some cases demonstrated adverse impact of lies, to not put too fine a point on it. And other countries, including recently, have passed laws that make it a crime or a civil offense to disseminate untrue information. And as always, I have to ask myself, what is the lesser of two evils? Would I rather trust my fellow individuals and those in the media to correct fabrications with truth, to counter falsehood with truth, or would I rather trust government officials to decide what is fake and what is not fake? And interestingly enough, the United States Supreme Court in many cases has held that there is a constitutional right to lie, not because lies are intrinsically valuable, but that the cost of outlawing them means that people are going to self-censor and over self-censor because they don't want to risk being convicted or even charged with lying, and therefore we will lose a lot of valuable and truthful expression. But we have to be so zealous, and I do have to say, with all of the publicity about fake news all across the political spectrum, I have become much more diligent myself in not accepting something. Of course, if it came out of your mouth, I would implicitly accept it, but anybody else, I'd have to do my own research.
Well, I would hope so. But I think what's really interesting is because of the president's attack on the press, one of the things it's done, which I think is good, is it's made journalists, it's made those of us in the press much more acutely aware of a responsibility we already knew we had. It reminded us that we really need to be accurate. We really need to be careful. And what's unfortunate is that enough of us make mistakes on a daily basis, especially with the 24-hour news cycle, that the president has ample opportunity to point out that, oh, this reporter or this network or this newspaper, here's yet another example.
But he also gives ample ammunition to point out that he's engaging in at least hyperbole and exaggeration, if not outright lies.
Okay, so in that vein, what do you think the free press's responsibility is, given that the president, there's no question, I mean, you're actually being magnanimous. I mean, the president distorts facts. The president makes up facts. The president lies about situations and people, but the press doesn't seem to really make as much of that as one would think. You don't see the kind of corrections that immediately occur. If you watch the nightly news, for those few people left in wheelchairs who probably do, you'll see a tweet across the entire screen, but there isn't any type of analysis that says, oh, by the way, this isn't accurate. This is.
I have actually seen a lot of analysis, including, it may very well depend on what press outlets you listen to. And I have to say, I have become so skeptical, which I think all of us should have a healthy skepticism. And there's a really interesting, delicate balance. That's a concept we often have to wrestle with in this country, where there's so many important values that often are in tension with each other, right? So on the one hand, when the president is constantly denouncing and scapegoating the media, that can become very dangerous because we don't want people to lose confidence and hope in the media as what has often been called the fourth branch of government, right? The watchdog that is helping we, the people, who do wield the ultimate sovereign power. Those are the first three words in the Constitution.
But that's happened. That's already happened.
But so
if you look at the numbers,
the distrust numbers are very high.
The president has been hugely successful in decreasing the American people's confidence in the
In all kinds of institutions.
Well,
and-
certainly
yeah.
the accuracy of
Yes,
the press.
yes.
So
And
what
that's
do we do about that?
That's a serious problem for democracy. But you know what, Aaron, showing how complicated this is, it would be a serious problem for democracy if people overly trusted the press and didn't have the healthy skepticism that they should bring to bear, whether it's Fox News or whether it's CNN or, dare I say, even whether it's your show. So we have to strike that balance where we understand the critically important role that the press plays in our democracy. And we can go back to the founding fathers. I think it was Madison who said that free people who have democratic power, if they don't have access to information through a free press, it's going to be either a farce or a tragedy. So it's not only a matter of individual liberty, but basically our whole structure of government depends on a robust press that is not cowed by bullies in the government and has the courage to call them to account when they are lying or when they are wrong, and does its best to avoid errors. But I think, you know, as there are going to be inevitable errors, to subject themselves to internal mechanisms and some external mechanisms. I know that there are all kinds of fact-checking services, and I know there are many initiatives that media are undertaking in part to address and redress this problem of people not trusting the media. We also have to deal with public education, starting at the earliest ages of school and maybe even preschool. You know, going back to a subject you and I talked about earlier, increasing access to media and distribution of messages and ability to use technology and the ability to interpret what you're getting from other sources, which ones are reliable, which ones are unreliable, how to do your own research. So I ultimately think all of these problems are going to push us to new heights of liberty and democracy.
Such optimism. However, you haven't addressed the issue of how does the press respond to these attacks? Because certainly the description of a robust press, an accurate press, a free press, I think everybody agrees with. I don't think that's an issue. I don't think folks are arguing about that. I think what the president has effectively done is undermined the American people's confidence in the veracity and the accuracy and the reliability of the press.
So you address that, as I said, by first of all being more transparent about what your processes are. And I know a number of media outlets have taken concerted steps to do that, thanks to the problems that.
So you don't think the press should take the president head on and say,
absolutely.
when we're attacked, we're going to respond and tell you why you're wrong?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, because I haven't seen the press do that.
I have seen that, and I don't want to, you know, cite what particular sources, but I could say before coming on your show today, I was listening to National Public Radio, and they were very explicit. In fact, they were interviewing one of my ACLU colleagues who described a particular court order, and the reporter said, so you are telling me that the Trump administration is repeatedly misdescribing, and I think even used the L word. I know there's been some fine debate about do we say he's wrong or do we say he's lying, because lying implies intentionality. But both the ACLU lawyer and the interviewer were pretty explicit, and they know what this order actually provides. They are knowingly describing it falsely. If you don't even use the L word, that's what a lie is.
All right, we're going to take our last break, and we'll be back to wrap up with Nadine in just a moment.
There's more of the Aaron Harber Show after this.
Even after the war on terror, when there was so much, you know, after 9/11, so much pressure on the courts not to protect rights of accused terrorists, in the very first case that the Supreme Court decided, the conservative justices joined with liberal ones in saying that war is not a blank check to the executive to run roughshod over the rights of U.S. citizens.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, this is part 2 of our special 2-part series with law professor Nadine Strossen, so make sure you watch part 1. So, we've touched a little bit on, especially in the first program, the legal system and courts. I think a lot of Americans don't have great confidence in our legal system. I'd like your thoughts on that as a law professor. And I think many people see, especially judicial decisions at high levels, as often being political, and that they see judges, especially where there are cases where there are good facts and bad facts on both sides. I think a lot of people feel judges are making decisions then based almost on their political perspective rather than what the law is or should be. So tell me your take on that, because you're in the middle of the field.
I basically do have great confidence in the courts, and in part because of the genius of our Constitution in creating federal courts that were insulated from majoritarian political pressures. Essentially, federal judges, once they've survived the appropriately tough hurdles of being nominated and confirmed, essentially have lifetime tenure. And in particular, they are protected from being removed because of the unpopularity of their decisions. And if you take the longer view of history, we have so much to celebrate when we see courageous federal judges who are bucking enormous political pressure, including attacks even from the presidents who nominated them, even physical threats to their lives and the lives of their families, I think, to stand up for constitutional values. So I think in particular of courageous judges in the Deep South during the Civil Rights Movement, when they really put teeth into the equal protection guarantees in the Constitution, the civil rights laws. They lived down threats to their lives, impeachment threats. And even after the War on Terror, when there was so much, after 9/11, so much pressure on the courts not to protect rights of accused terrorists, in the very first case that the Supreme Court decided, the conservative justices joined with liberal ones in saying that war is not a blank check to the executive to run roughshod over the rights of U.S. citizens. So I certainly strongly disagree with many particular decisions by the Supreme Court today and throughout history. But on the whole, I think that these are men and women who do take their oath or affirmation to uphold the Constitution very seriously. That said, there are very legitimate debates about what the Constitution means, and those go back to the beginning of our history, as we saw debates between Hamilton and Jefferson.
All right, let's talk briefly, I know we only have a minute left though, about Americans' views of the legal system. And just in one sentence, tell me why you think Americans generally don't think highly of lawyers, for example.
Americans don't think highly of lawyers in general, but guess what? They think very highly of their own lawyers. And I think it's because all of us tend to want our own rights to be zealously defended, but not that other person's rights.
All right. Well, I actually disagree. I think a lot of people aren't excited about their own lawyers too. But
get a new one. Go to the ACLU.
All right. Well, we always recommend that. All right, that was Nadine Strossen. This is the end of part 2. Make sure you watch part 1 of our 2-part series with Nadine. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.